DIVUS.
Understanding the use of DHCP and hostname with a DIVUS heartbeat. These two aspects are among the most special features of a DIVUS heartbeat, so in this video I will explain them to you in detail. Let's start with the hostname. Then we will learn that hostname and DHCP are bound together and why. A hostname is a string to assign human-readable names to devices on a network. There are then technologies which are able to read these names and to call devices by their hostname. These technologies will still use the IP address to make the real call behind the scenes, much like when you connect to a website using a domain name which is resolved then to an IP address. All this is done because it's easier for humans to remember a device's name than an IP address. For the heartbeat, that's not the primary reason. We use this strategy because it allows to configure the whole network almost completely independently from the IP addresses. This is very important. You can set up the heartbeat and all the other devices once, and it will then adapt to any future network changes without your intervention. To explain this better, let's make the most common example. When the integrator goes on site to install his network and his devices, the system is not complete yet. Usually, the internet router will be installed weeks or months later. So, you are usually supposed to go there again, run through all the devices again and change all the network settings to adapt to the router, which maybe is giving addresses of a completely different network so your devices are not recognized and neither reachable nor do they have internet access. Can this be avoided at all? Yes, it can. You can solve a part of these issues by using DHCP, which actually is what we recommend you to do on all the devices of your DSI if possible. DHCP is a service usually offered by your internet router, which distributes IP addresses to anyone requesting one, using predefined IP network and DNS settings. But what about the servers? If you have servers, you can't use DHCP because it might someday change the IP address assigned to the server, making it unreachable for its clients, which are configured for the old IP address, right? Well, it depends. We have the solution, and yes, you guessed it right, it's the DIVUS heartbeat. If you use the heartbeat's hostname instead of an IP address, you will always reach it, no matter what IP address is used in the background. So now the scenario is this. You set all the devices to use DHCP, possibly also the servers. How are you supposed to configure the clients when it comes to their service settings? You have a VoIP service setting if you use SIP-based intercom, like our DIVUS video phone app. Here you will use the heartbeat as server, so we'll use its hostname in place of the IP address. The default hostname is DHB-heartbeat. Then you have a server setting for Optima, if you use a DIVUS KNX control device for your KNX visualization. Here again, you should use DHB-heartbeat in the server address field. But with a special port 3000 instead of 80 or 3001 instead of 443. The heartbeat will then forward this communication to the KNX server. Do you have another kind of server? You can use this same strategy, but you will have to add a custom port forwarding rule. To learn how to do that, please check the video about firewall and port forwardings. So, what happens when there is a network change? In our typical example, one day the family moves in, gets an internet router from its provider and plugs in a cable which goes from the router to the heartbeat. And here comes the smart part of the heartbeat. It will recognize the presence of a new DHCP server, maybe also a network change. So the DHCP server role played up to that point will be handed over to the newcomer automatically. If the network also changes, the devices will get different addresses, but nothing will change on the surface. You will still be able to reach all the devices you want to. This works because the heartbeat itself will always resolve the hostname, matching it to its IP address to any device asking for it on the network. To be sure that all the changes are in place, the heartbeat should be power cycled when a new router is installed. If the router should one day stop working or be turned off or unplugged, don't worry. Again, the heartbeat will recognize the router's absence and take its place as DHCP server. So everything will work as usual, this time also maintaining the same IP addresses. So, your home automation network is going to be safe, always and whatever happens. Through the smart management of the DHCP server role, the heartbeat will do all the boring work for you automatically and in the background. The customer will notice nothing. All this complexity is perfectly hidden. The customer simply experiences reliability. This is the optimal scenario, but what if it's not feasible this way? Well, let's see. You can use different settings as well. You can use static IP addresses on all devices or only on the servers, which would mean having a mixed setup with static and dynamic addresses. For servers, you probably will have to add some firewall rules or some port forwardings or both. So, if you prefer or need to go this way, you are absolutely free to do so. You will lose the capability of the heartbeat to adapt to network changes automatically, but for the rest you will have a perfectly working setup. One last note. There is a separate DHCP server for the residential intercom network. It has to be activated in the settings if you need it, because it's not running as default. Our recommended setting for this network is to use static addresses. Why is that? Because this is a completely isolated network. The only communication which has to be assured is between the single devices of the residential intercom and the heartbeat itself, and this can be any network, with the exception of the one used for the DIVUS secure intranet. So, this means that the best thing to do is to leave the network on its default settings, which means the heartbeat will have the address 192.168.69.1 and will play the gateway of the 69 network. So, you should configure your outdoor devices to have addresses like 192.168.69.2 or 3 and so on, up to a maximum of 254. Let me conclude by briefly summarizing. We recommend to set all your smart home devices to use DHCP if possible and connect them to the DIVUS secure network. That network should be set to auto configuration correspondingly. For the residential intercom, use static addresses for the devices and keep the default settings for the network, which is set to the 192.168.69 network with the heartbeat itself on address 1. If you have more than one device here, you may use an additional switch and connect it to the manager's port. As VoIP server, when configuring the clients, use the heartbeat's hostname, which is DHB-heartbeat if you did not customize it. As KNX server or KNX superior address from the client side, use DHB-heartbeat and don't forget to specify port 3000. For other servers, only the port would change according to the custom port forwarding rule which you would have added. For remote access to one of your devices, nothing changes. You still need a DDNS service or public IP address and one or more port forwarding rules on your internet router, where you need to use an IP address for the target device. If you already have a port forwarding rule on the heartbeat for local use, then use that by addressing that same port of the heartbeat from your router's new rule. For more details, please check our manual and the other tutorials. Have fun!
DIVUS.